about 21 years. And I've got 3 kids. And what he didn't mention is they're all teenagers right now. So yeah, if you could pray for me, I'll pray for you, because definitely need that with 3 teens. And I've also got a hyperactive dog. So let's toss that in the mix as well. So as we begin, I just want to kind of get a sense from folks. How many of you are married? Just a show of hands. So pretty much everyone here, and I can't see the folks who don't have a photo. And it looks like a few of you are actually here with your spouse, which is even better. And so that'll be great. And we'll do a couple things to connect the 2 of you, and we'll invite the rest of you to communicate with them in a little different way. So what I thought I would share with you this evening is, because I know this has been a time in many ways of great disillusionment. And so I want to just start by giving a little perspective on the pandemic, then connect back with our purpose as partners during pandemic and our purpose in marriage, and then a little bit of a plan, some strategies that you can employ to do that. And when we get to the strategies, I am just typing in the chat a link, and that's a link to and when you get to that page, you'll see a big blue button you can click on, and that would be a handout for tonight. So you can have that now, you can use it later for reference, whatever you wish. But just wanted you all to have that as well. And then we'll save some time for some Q&A as we move to the end of the evening. So to start, I think the image I want to give is, COVID is really a crucible, right? What's a crucible? A crucible is this container in which metals and substances, they're melted, subjected to very high temperatures. And it's a situation of severe trial in which these different elements interact, but leading to the creation of something new. I think that's important for us to remember, that though there's the crucible is this place of struggle right now and can be for so many of us, it's also the place where exists the possibility for grace and transformation. So we want to keep that in the back of our minds as we go through everything this evening. So to give you a little perspective on this, I'm going to share with you a slide. And it's a graph that kind of looks at a community's response to disaster. And so as you look at that, let's kind of walk through like how we respond to any disaster, but in this case, we'll talk about COVID-19. That we had these periods early where there was the talk about it and the threats about it. And then we hit that point of impact, if you will, where we first shut down back in March. And what happens, when there's this initial sort of crisis that hits, people kind of draw together. There's almost this heroic response that, okay, we can get through this. And so for 2 weeks and even 4 weeks, we work together, we get through it. And then all of a sudden we realize that, oh my gosh, this isn't ending. And we start this sort of slide into disillusionment. And a curious thing about disillusionment is when we are disillusioned, it reminds us that what we were seeing before was actually illusion. So perhaps the illusion of normalcy and control in everyday life, that was shaken. And so we hit into April and into May. And I think April this year, nobody told us, but April this year had about 357 days to it, and May about 390, right? They just dragged on forever and ever, and we slid down. We hit to this bottom point. Whoop, I lost it there.
Lost your screen.
Okay, let me bring it back again. There we go. Let me try that one more time. I lost my photo. I will pull it up for you. Sorry about that. See if I can get it. Here we go. It'll come back. And there we go. So saying we kind of dropped into this period of real disillusionment. And then if you remember back around mid-June, it seemed like things were looking up. Stores were opening up, things were happening. And then sort of bam, we got hit again and more disillusionment and we dropped in. And this was a real difficult time for many folks because it seemed like we were starting to get better. We had our hope and it was dashed. And where we are now is a good question, right? Are we on the way up? Is there another dip coming? We don't know. Things we don't know. And we have to remember to keep our hope on what we can control versus what we cannot. And so amidst all of this, there's two fundamental ways that I've really seen this impacting us. The first one is that it's really just exacerbated any symptoms we might have, meaning our bodies have just sort of absorbed the stress like sponges. And so we can feel the stress, we can feel the irritability, we can feel the depression, all of those things can come in. If we're prone to any of those things or prone to addiction, we know those things will just be exacerbated. We know that alcohol sales have gone up dramatically during COVID-19. And while tonight we're not really focusing so much on the individual, it's important that we do pay attention to those things because taking care of your own body, mind, and spirit is going to be so critical, even for your relationships, to be able to do all of that. When we start talking about relationships, it's really exposed the issues that have been there. Most couples have said they've either, experienced coming together as a team or a lot of conflict, a lot of tension. Sadly, we've seen a dramatic increase in the filings for divorce since COVID-19 has started. And really, if we think about that, it's not that COVID caused these things, it's that COVID just exposed them. Before, there was ways that we could just avoid things, right? I could stay at work all hours of the night. I could go to the gym. I could go to a friend's house. I can go to the neighborhood watering hole, right? There's lots of ways and things I could do to just avoid whatever tension might be there so that when I'm back home, it's just kept at that more surface level. But now without those built-in diversions, all the tension's building. And it's sort of like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, right? Eventually it's going to kind of pop up and just spread out and go somewhere. And so the question we have to really ask ourselves is, do we want to take this opportunity to come together as a team, or are we going to allow it to lead us into more disconnection, more tension, more isolation, and more conflict? So you have to make the conscious choice, right? The conscious choice is yours to make. Now, I want to remind you of a couple things because I want to swing your vote in the direction of choice, right? Of choosing connection. And so there's two things I want to remind you of. And this is the purpose. Number one, whatever you may think it may be, you've been put on this earth for one purpose: to love and to learn how to be loved, right? To love and to learn how to be loved. Our God is a relational God, right? We know existing in the Trinity. Exist three persons in one. And we can't really come to understand God without understanding this fundamental concept that God exists in relationship. And what binds that relationship is love. Right? So love is, right, the prime directive for the Christian. Right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then, in fact, the entire law and the prophets is based on this. Right? So it's not just a good idea. it's everything. So again, whatever we think it may have been, we've been put on this earth to love and to learn how to be loved. And what Pope Francis has said about marriage is that the grace of the sacrament of marriage is before all else to perfect the couple's love. Right? So the grace of marriage is about perfecting your love. That's your mission, right? That's your mission. But point number 2 is that because we are imperfect, what Francis has also said is that every marriage is a kind of salvation history, right? A salvation history. So what does that mean? It means that it's through the healing of our own wounds and imperfections that we experience salvation. And this is going to occur most strongly in our marriage and family. It echoes the Vatican II words that say, the family is this school of deeper humanity, where everyone gathered around the family hearth will find a readier path to maturity, salvation, and holiness. Or to put it simply, for those of you sitting next to your spouse right now, you're sitting next to your ticket to heaven, right? Your job is to get them to heaven, right? And they're your ticket to heaven. So think about that the next time you say or do something to them or for them, right? Because it's that working together amidst the imperfections to bring that growth and healing that we all need to move forward. So I hope I've swung your vote towards the idea of moving towards connection and not disconnection. Yes, give me a little thumbs up if you got a yes on that. Going for connection. All right, awesome. So Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. All right, he said that at the end of World War II, and he was referring to the very unlikely alliance between himself and Stalin and Roosevelt that ultimately led to the creation of the United Nations, right? These 3 disparate parties, but they come together and do this. And so the idea is we're not just about trying to get through this. We don't want to waste the opportunity. We're actually going to grow stronger amidst it, right? We're going to go stronger amidst it. And so the plan here, I'm going to talk about a few different things to offer you, really threefold. Number 1, I'm going to talk about what I call the COVID-19 relationship survival app. We'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk about communication a little bit. And I want to give you 3 keys to good communication. We could spend hours and hours talking about communication, but I'll just give you 3 good keys. And then I'm going to talk about this, an exercise we can do when we experience conflict to try and at least come back together, which I call an olive branch exercise, because it's all about extending the olive branch to one another. And as I present these, I just want to say that my focus is on simplicity, trying to give you some things that are simple, although not necessarily easy strategies. They are going to be simple and significant in terms of what they can do. Not end all be alls, but certainly the step towards any further change we would ever hope to make when these things come. So the first one I want to mention is this idea of this COVID relationship survival app. And I call it an app because the 3 things on it are going to be A, P, and P. And the idea here is that we need to front load the system as much as possible to buffer the effects of stress. So it's like when you know the flu's going around, right? Maybe someone else in the house is sick. What do? Well, you make sure you take your vitamins, you drink your fluids, you do all those things that you really need, and you kind of amp it up a little bit, right? To try and keep yourself as healthy as you can. And of course you eat vegan, isn't that correct, Father Ian? Yes. Okay, thank you. So we do what we have to do to stay healthy. And that's the idea of this. John Gottman, who is the #1 marriage researcher out there, he was able to, in one study, observe couples talking about an area of disagreement for 15 minutes. And then, with almost 90% accuracy, he could tell you which couples were together 5 years later. right? Sounds like he's got a crystal ball, right? I watch you for 15 minutes and I can predict 5 years later whether you're going to be together. Well, it was a lot of science, actually, no crystal ball, no magic. What he did is, as he observed these couples, he'd observe them sitting there, and he had this room set up in his lab, and he called it the love lab because it looked like a living room, but with lots of wires. And what he did is he had all the couples hooked up, and he was monitoring their heart rate, their perspiration, all their vital signs, and he was then observing all their minute behaviors. And what he found is that even discussing an area of tension, couples that had this ratio of 5 positives to every 1 negative stayed together. And as the ratio went higher than 5 to 1, even more likelihood. As it dipped below 5 to 1, those are the ones where he was starting to predict more conflict would come in and eventually separation. So when we talk about this 5 to 1, what are we talking about? It could be as simple as I lean over and I'm nodding because I'm following you. It could be I put my hand on your arm just to say, I'm here with you. It could be an acknowledgement that I'm following you, what you're saying. It could be I understand. It could be a smile as you're talking. Let's contrast that with a roll of the eyes, right? Again, I've got 3 teens, so I know what an eye roll looks like from a mile away. So no one can get over an eye roll on me, right? But I do an eye roll. I just look away. I make a kind of sound. I go like this, right? Body language, right? Those would all be the 1 little negatives that he's counting. And so throughout a video, there's hundreds of these little words, actions, behaviors he's picking up on. And he can use those again to predict. And so again, it reminds us that we really need to make sure we're amping up the positives to counteract any of those negatives that might kind of come in there at some point. And all of these things that I'm going to talk about in this app are behaviors, because it's behaviors that build habits and habits that builds character. We can't just have good ideas about what we want to do. We have to put it into action. And so if you hear any of these and they sound difficult to you, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I'm glad that that is, because your brain might come in with lots of reasons why it won't work or why it'd be too hard. And if it does, it just gives you an opportunity to step forward, opportunity to move into something to be that change that you want to be. So the first one, again, it's going to be A, P, and P, is appreciation. Appreciation. Express appreciation every day. I'm going to invite you to do what I call the 3-sentence appreciation. So what do I mean by that? A lot of times just in passing, right, if we're in a pretty good relationship or good marriage, we'll say thank you, we'll acknowledge, and it just happens and it kind of just, and we move on. We don't think twice about it. And of course, those things are great. But we're going to take one over the course of a day and deepen it a little with just maybe 2 more sentences. So I might say to you, I appreciate when you brought me coffee this morning. Right? And if you might do that, and then thanks, and you go on, but we're going to deepen it. I appreciate when you brought me coffee this morning. You know, when you bring me coffee, it just reminds me that you really think that I'm special to you, right? That you're thinking about me. And when you do that, I just feel loved and special. So I'm just going to deepen it a little bit, right? I'm going to deepen that. So I'm going to give that what I call 3-sentence appreciation. And in fact, what I want to invite you to do now, this will be great. If you're here as a couple, I'm going to invite you to turn and share that with each other now. If you're here as separate from your partner, you and I are going to pull up our phones right now, and we're going to send them a text. And we're going to surprise them. They might wonder what the heck you've been drinking tonight, but you're going to send an appreciation to them. So pull up your phone, start texting, I appreciate, again, the little code or the little structure. Express one thing you appreciate and 2 sentences why, right? One thing you appreciate, 2 sentences why, maybe a feeling with it. So go ahead now. We're going to give you all a minute to do that. You get bonus points if you put little emojis in your appreciation too. So just did that one to my wife. She's going to wonder what's going on. And couples, if you did it with each other, give each other a nice little hug just before we move on, so I know you've done it. All right. Great. Great. How was that? Feel free to unmute yourself and just kind of maybe just kind of say what that was like, just taking that little brief pause out and doing that. Or even what it was like to text that message, what it felt like.
Felt good and it was pretty easy.
Felt good. It was pretty easy, right? Yeah. Yeah. Great.
It's nice. It feels like it's diffusing any kind of tension. So it's gratefulness has a tendency to do that.
Yes. Good point. Gratitude has a tendency to diffuse any tension that could be there. Yeah.
I thought it was, he's going to laugh, and laughing is always good, but it was also very sweet. Yes.
Yeah. Right. Right. It's great that it'll bring laughter and have that sweetness to it. Yeah. Yeah. It's great. You know, when couples come in to see me for couples therapy, it's the very first thing I have them do. And it's the last thing they expect to be doing when they walk in the door, right? They're already ready, right? There's already tension there, and that's what their brains are at. But it does that same effect. It kind of just diffuses it so that we can talk more about whatever we need to talk about. And then even ongoing, I always begin and end every session with a couple doing an appreciation. So feel free to mute everyone again, because I'm hearing CNN or Fox in the background.
Okay.
There we go. There you go. All right. And in fact, if you'd like, put on your phone an alarm to remind you to do this tomorrow. And then not only that, I'm going to give you a little challenge. Set it to recur for the next 30 days. You've got a 1-month challenge. See if you can do an appreciation a day for a month. Right? So again, set the timer on, set the alarm on your phone, recur every day, because we need reminders, right? We're trying to build a new habit. We need all the reminders we can get to do it. So as you are doing that, the first P, physical affection. Touch. Touch is very healing. Touch is very connecting. It impacts the nervous system, right? In that same way, what touch can do is just help calm the system when we are in the presence of someone we love. And so I wish more of you were here as couples, because what I'd be inviting you to do is actually a 1-minute hug, right? A 1-minute hug, because the brief hug is wonderful. Oh my gosh, that seemed like forever. The 1-minute hug. And it's amazing what happens. And you never would imagine how long a minute could feel when you really just slow down and do that with one another, right? So a 1-minute hug is great. There's so much we can do without words, whether it's a hug, even eye gazing. You know, there was this study that got random people and had them gaze in each other's eyes for 4 minutes, just sit across from each other, gaze in each other's eyes. And even people who had never met each other before noticed themselves feeling closer to the person they were gazing upon. They had this sense of connection. They couldn't explain it, they just felt it. But of course, then when you put people who do know each other, much less spouses together, wow, it can be very powerful. It can be kind of uncomfortable, and we have to sometimes work through it. But again, just that eye gaze can also be important. So the physical affection is great. And the third item of the app is what I call a platinum behavior. Anyone have an idea what if I said the platinum rule, anyone know what that is? No? How about the golden rule? I know someone can unmute themselves and tell me the golden rule. This is a Catholic audience, isn't it? I hope we know the golden rule.
Isn't it do unto others as you would have others do unto you?
Right, exactly. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule, a little bit different. The platinum rule says, do unto others as they would have done unto them. So let's think about that, right, in marriage, right? I do for you what you would want done for you. Not I do for you what I'd want you to do for me. Any of you who are familiar with the 5 love languages? Just quick hand up if you ever heard of the 5 love languages, right? And that's what the 5 love languages is about. It's recognizing that sometimes we give and experience love in different ways. So you may love that 1-minute hug, right? You're a physical touch person. But your spouse may love that appreciation because for them, the words make all the difference in the world. Or perhaps it's just quality time together that floats your boat. Or it's an act of service, or it's a gift, right? So there's different ways that comes into play. So the idea here is that let me think of what it is my spouse likes, and can I stretch into a platinum behavior, as I call it, each day for them, right? What would he or she like? And let me stretch into that. Again, is it that act of service, those just nice words? And it's so important because when we don't recognize these differences, it can lead to a lot of tension. You know, when Gary Chapman, who wrote the book, he just talks about, you know, these couples that kept coming in until he figured this out. He'd be like, you know, they'd come in and the wife might say to the husband, you never tell me you love me. And the husband would be like, what do you mean? I go to work every day. I come home, I support our family. I'm here at night all the time. What are you talking about? Right? And again, it was just realizing that, no, for him, it was the acts of service that said, I love you. But for her, it was like she needed to hear the words. And so by learning that about each other, they could sort of stretch and help give the other one what was needed. So the other thing I always think about with that one is that means when I go home tonight, if there's any dishes in the sink, I just do them. That's one that I know my wife appreciates, that act of service. So I don't need to say anything. I just can do that. And that will communicate to her that love and that care that I have for her. So again, this app that I'm talking about is all about front loading the system, right? Appreciation, physical affection, platinum behaviors, right? All front load that system, especially during a time like COVID when we can be driving each other nuts when we're at home with each other. And if that is happening, let's talk a little bit about communication. And I'm going to focus just in our brief few moments here on the listening part, because right, God gave us 2 ears, 1 mouth, and there's probably a message in that we should really hone in more on the listening than worrying about what we are saying. And as the prayer goes, let us seek first to understand before being understood. And to be honest, listening is the harder part of the work for couples. You know, so often, again, when couples come in, whether they're, you know, engaged in learning the tools or they're in the middle of tension and struggling, they think the hard part is going to be able to speak and share. But ultimately, the receiving, the listening is really hard because when we hear things that aren't in line with what we want to hear, our natural tendency is going to be to react, right? Our brain's going to jump in and want to defend. And we might defend by attacking, we might defend by avoiding, whatever our characteristic style is. And it can be hard to stay present and just allow that connection to happen. And so this is something I teach, again, in workshops with individuals, with couples, all the time. And so let me give you 3 specific tools you can use, because I think in theory, right, and we will hear this on Sunday in a homily very frequently, right? We talk about being compassionate for one another. We talk about the need for peace and coming together and being community and listening to one another. And again, it's something that we all strive for, but in practice, again, when we hear a difference, a lot of times it can fly out of our brain. So let me give you 3 of the specific tools that can help you do that. And these are the 3 steps we use in when I teach what's called the Imago Dialogue. So the first one is mirroring. And mirroring is now I'm putting my curiosity to work. And when I mirror you, I'm literally just going to reflect back what it is you're saying to me. And I'm doing it in a way, again, that's communicating my openness and my non-judgment to you. So I'm going to say the words, but I'm also going to make sure that my body language and my tone of voice is also in that same way of being open and receptive. And again, it could be, in practice, it sounds as simple as if I'm saying, I appreciate that you bring me coffee in the morning, I might mirror back, oh, you appreciate that I bring you coffee in the morning. And the 3 magic words we toss in are, is there more? Right? So I'm inviting you to share more with me. Now, when you're saying something that you appreciate, it's probably pretty easy for me to do that. Let's flip the coin a little bit. Let's say it was, you know, you were going to come home you told you were going to come home at 6 last night and you walked in the door at 7:30 and I'm pretty frustrated. Now, right away, I know where I want to go with that. I want to defend myself. Right? I want to jump in. Well, you shouldn't feel frustrated because I was at work. You knew where I was. I'm not out at the bar. I'm not carousing, right? Why are you getting on me? Anything like that. But if I really want to listen to you and honor you, same rule would apply. Okay, so when I got home at 7:30 last night after saying I was going to be home at 6, you were pretty frustrated by that. Is there more you want to share? Because usually the 3 words I want to say are not, is there more, but like, are you done? Right? I want to cut you off and just speak. So is there more invites? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to just invite that person to share more with me. And when I mirror, I'm also helping the other person calm as well. Because if I'm feeling listened to, I can sort of modulate myself. If you're defending yourself, I'm going to just keep getting more frustrated. So I'm going to mirror back your words. Is there more? The second thing we would do is, once we've heard the message, once there is no more, so to speak, would be to validate, right? Validation. Validation is when we honor the other person's perspective. Right? Sometimes we have to take what we might call the God's eye view, because I can't see it that way, but I have to step back and try and understand that this is how you see it. It doesn't imply agreement. I would never tell a couple, you know, just tell your spouse, yeah, I agree with you, honey, right? That's just going to lead to all sorts of tension, conflict down the road, resentments probably down the road. So it isn't about agreement, but it's about validation, right? That I'm following you and you make sense, right? I can see sort of what makes sense through your eyes about this. And if I can even acknowledge that, it makes sense because, right, X, Y, Z. F. Scott Fitzgerald said the sign of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Right? I can hold these 2 opposing ideas at the same time and I can still function, right? I have to hold that. I think it's also the sign of a good marriage, right? I can hold your perspective and mine, not make one better or worse. Right? That's why we validate. It's not better or worse, just different. And I want to honor that. And then validation is more of a sort of a mental, right? It's more in the head, right? I'm understanding your perspective. Then the third piece is going to be empathy. The empathy is really more in the heart. And this is where I'm really imagining the feelings that are there underneath. And I might even guess, right? Oh, so I'm imagining this leaves you feeling, right? If I heard that frustration about coming home late, makes sense. Yeah, I'd said this and I'm late. Makes sense you're frustrated. Also imagine you might be feeling either disappointed or hurt or abandoned or unimportant, right? Sad. Again, I might just, in knowing you, have some other guesses of what those things might be. So again, when I empathize, again, I'm trying to step into your world, your emotional world. And sometimes it requires me to also have, you know, the thing about empathy is that if someone else is in pain, it sort of requires me to be in touch with areas in my own life where I have felt pain, right? So that way I can really be with you in it. Versus maybe sympathy might just be, oh, I feel bad for you, right? Empathy is I'm feeling with you, right? Empathy is feeling with the other person. And so those, just wanted to mention those tools briefly. We mirror, we can validate the other person's perspective, empathize with the feelings. Very challenging practices for all of us. And over these next, what do we got about now, 6 weeks till election day, you're going to see very little of those three things if you watch the news. If you watch debates, right? You'll hear very little of that because what do we know, right? That's one of the frustrations we have, right, with our system, that there are these two sides that just sort of hone in on their two sides and are not necessarily always interested in compromise, right? And because compromise would really take, I have to listen and understand your perspective to want to work with you. And sadly, it doesn't get you a lot of traction if you're in politics right now. But in marriage, it gets you a lot of traction. In marriage, it builds connection. In marriage, it brings healing and love. The third thing I want to mention is this olive branch exercise. And the olive branch, right? What do we know? An olive branch is a peace offering, right? So we're going to offer this as a again, just a way of starting the reconnection. And with the olive branch, I'm not doing it because I want you to do it for me. I'm not doing it to get something in return, right? In a sense, it's about an apology because it's the right thing for me to do. And the olive branch exercise isn't going to get into all the whys and where to's about it. It's just going to focus on what happened and acknowledging that. And that's going to be the first sort of foray into it. It keeps us focused on our own actions. And just 4 lines in it. If there was some tension, I'm saying, first, I want to make sure you're ready. You know, I'd like to have this olive branch discussion with you. Are you available? My contribution to this tension was, and what I did to make it worse. Right? So I'm saying my contribution, because usually I say one thing, but probably if you think about it, there's probably something even more you did. So I had, what I did to make it worse. And I'm sorry for that. What I could have done differently is, and what I will do differently next time is. So those are just 4 sentences just to start the process back, right? And thank you for listening. If you feel so moved as a partner, then you can do the same in return. Because pretty much whenever there's that tension or conflict, we both play a role in it. We can keep a scorecard, but it's probably not going to be too helpful. If we start out by just acknowledging our part in it, it's going to help diffuse and help us move into it. Be careful not to say things like, my contribution to the conflict was doing X because you, right? And immediately what I've done is I've just sort of now I'm putting the onus back on you, right? Just know I did this, right? I'm sorry. Think about any apology. If you ever heard someone apologize to you saying, I'm sorry, but, you probably don't necessarily feel like that really hits your heart very much, right? Because they just said but, and now it kind of just spoiled the whole thing. So just really offer that. And when you're listening, just take it in. Resist the urge to say, well, it's about time. Or, well, I was wondering when you were going to say that. Or, yeah, you do that all the time, right? All those responses would do is tell your spouse, don't ever apologize to me again, because you're going to get attacked when you do, right? So again, go back to what I was just saying about the listening. Stay in that space where you can listen and take that in and thank them for that. So the idea, it's the end of division and the beginning of peace. And just one other point I want to make around that is that sometimes I hear the question that it sounds like, well, I'm supposed to just say that and move on, no matter what the other person does. And is that what you're saying here? And no, that's not what we're saying. What this is about, it's about being able to own your own part in something and still be able to maintain a boundary. It's pointing out the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, right? Forgiveness is an inside job, right? I can go and I can work on forgiveness on my own. I can seek God's help in forgiveness. Right? Reconciling requires two, right? It requires two. So I can forgive, and it helps me with my own process. It helps me let go. But reconciling is going to require both of us to do that. It's going to require both of us. The sacrament, right? The sacrament is actually reconciliation, right? It's not the sacrament of forgiveness, because the relationship there is with God, right? It's you and God with, right, through the action of the priest. So that's the reconciling that is there, right? That's going on. It's not just my own inner work. And so again, forgiveness is that inner job. And as we know in the gospel, we're called to forgive 7 times, 70 times, which in a marriage, we will need to do that, probably at least that many. And again, hopefully if our partner's on board with this, we can also do the work of reconciling. Or a last way, I'm going to give you a last simpler one, then I'm going to pause and just take some questions or have some discussion. But the last one, to really even shorten the olive branch and get right to the heart of it, is what you all know, but you may not know the name of it, the Confiteor. The Confiteor. Now, think about saying this to your spouse. And actually, if you're with your spouse, just turn and look at them now. And you're going to say this along with me, because once I start, you're going to know the rest of the words. And if you're there by yourself, I want you just to think this. And the one difference that you're going to hear is you're going to put your spouse's name, you're going to insert it into it, and it'll make sense. So right now, look over at your spouse and just start saying these words. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my spouse, say their name, that I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words, in what I have done and what I have failed to do, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Therefore, I ask Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, all the angels and the saints, and you, my spouse, to pray for me to the Lord our God. Amen. Amen. How was that? Kind of brings us down a notch, doesn't it? In a good way. So let me pause there. And I just want to open up. Any thoughts, questions, discussion, anything you want to share? And again, don't forget, in the chat, I had put that link. So there's a handout with the app and those 3 steps and the olive branch exercise as well.
It's funny, that Confiteor, I do appreciate being at Mass and being able to look at everyone there. And I see a lot of folks at our church at St. Julie's do that, and they've taught me to do that. But rarely do I look at my own husband as I'm saying, I just mentioned to him, I'm like, yeah, but I never look at you.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was very powerful, saying it to my husband. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, you know, it's more vulnerable to look at that person who we're most closest to. But again, nice to hear that it felt powerful in doing that, right?
Much so.
We step into that vulnerability, we can get so much in return. Yeah.
You know, I look for kind of the good in the COVID crisis. You know, maybe I'm down the plateau, or maybe it's still in the early stages, but there's a lot of good that's come out. Just time with, forced time, you know, and But my question is, what do you think God, I mean, I know God's ways aren't our ways, but there's, maybe he has something for us to learn from this. And that's really our task, is to grow through, knowing that we're not in control of one, which I've learned a lot, many times. But just, I wonder what you think of that as a growth opportunity for couples, really looking at it the other way, because everybody looks at all the problems, and I think there's some good things.
Yeah, yeah. There's always opportunity for growth. Absolutely. I think, and that's, during difficult times, we can look and see how it can draw us together. Many, like I said, that forced time together can be an opportunity to grow. Or if it brings up that tension, it gives us an opportunity to actually address it and to heal it. I think that the challenge when like when I was showing that slide, and when I was talking the other night about it, it was kind of more talking about hope, and how it really calls on us to be people of hope, and to really focus on where that hope comes from. Right? The hope isn't in, by X date this is going to be over. Right? That sets us up. The hope, where does our hope lie? Right? And if, as people of faith, if we put our hope in God, then we can feel more secure. I heard this great quote that said, hope or faith is, it's not knowing what the future holds, but it's knowing who holds the future. Right? If I know God holds the future, then okay, one day at a time, we'll get through this. We'll get through this.
I think I'm going along with what Scott was mentioning, and what you had mentioned was the amplification of whatever is going on in our home, whether it's been good or been bad, or something's just underlying an underlying tension. I think that COVID has managed, maybe in good ways and in bad ways, to just amplify those things that are already in us. Whether, for me, I couldn't walk out of the house for a few weeks. I kept throwing Bob out of the house and saying, "Go grocery shopping for us," because I was petrified. So he was my hero during that time, as he always is. But it does amplify the good and the bad, along with what Scott was saying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It does. It does.
Can you talk a little bit more about forgiveness versus reconciliation when it comes to spouses, couples, the mechanics of it?
So more the mechanics of it, you were saying, like how to?
Yes, the how to.
How to? Yeah, sure. So again, the first thing, like in that exercise I was saying, is whenever there's some tension, and oftentimes first we just need some space. Like if there's been some escalation, it's best to have some space. And during that time when we were in our own space, the invitation then is to think, okay, what was triggered in me, and what was my contribution to this? Right? Keep the focus on myself as much as I can. And I may also just need to take some time to just go breathe, go for a run, say a prayer, journal a bit, whatever helps me just ground and try and just connect with that part that's there. And then when we come back, again, that invitation is just sort of like the olive branch, or like the Confiteor, is just to come back and say, okay, my part in this was this, and I'm sorry for that. And if we both do that, then again, it kind of just brings it down, and then we can kind of move into that discussion maybe about what happened. But the thing we want to be most careful about is, the real toxic things are the blame, shame, and criticism. If we start going there, then we're just going to start going back down the wrong path, and probably best to kind of step away at that point. Again, I stay on my own side of the street as much as I can. So even if I have to reference, like when you came home late last night, that's different than saying, you were so inconsiderate last night when you showed up late. All right, now I'm starting to criticize. You're inconsiderate by doing this. I just said, though, you came home late, that's just stating what happened. But then I'm saying, I was frustrated. I was angry. or I was disappointed, right? So when I'm speaking, I'm trying to say, keep the focus as much as I can on me without that blame, shame, or criticism. Is that helpful? Good. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you. I was not linking these three concepts that you were giving at the beginning and the reconciliation part. So the idea is for both parties to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You got it. You got it.
Can you speak as well on when the other party, when your spouse is not in the same place you are, seeking that kind of forgiveness or reconciliation? We still practice these on our own?
So just to clarify, so that like maybe you're at that space ready to want to reconcile, but they're not there yet. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think, again, if I think of the forgiveness as my own internal work, right? I still want to move to that. If my spouse isn't ready to hear it, I don't need to force it on them, right? Maybe we wait till we get to the right time. Normally, and usually we're going to find the opposites here, but a lot of times in marriage, one spouse is the one who likes to kind of talk it out, and they can like talk it out while they're feeling it and all of that. The other one tends to like to go inward and have more time to reflect on it first. There's not a better or a worse in those two ways, but but oftentimes there's a difference that one person's one way and the other one's the other in a marriage. And most of the time, not always, but most of the time, men are the ones who like need the time. They go inward. They're in their head and they need to kind of process a while first. Women are socialized better at being emotional. They understand emotions better and are usually more ready to be able to talk about them. Again, not always that way, but a lot of times. So the idea is, though, we come together when the team is ready, right? When the team is ready. It's sort of like we've called time out. We're going to come back together when we're both ready. But in the meantime, I'm doing my own work on that. And this is sort of an aside with it, but if I notice that there is some tension or my spouse is feeling some tension and they say something, one little thing I can do kind of ties in what I was talking about with the mirroring. If I hear something like that, I just kind of go up to them and say, wait, let me see if I got you. You were saying, and I just mirror them. So it's sort of like giving me a little gift that I'm listening to you. And it just might invite them to want to share a little more. Does that address your question? All right.
What happens if the mistakes of blame, shame happens? we lost it.
If you lose it, you know what? We're human. If we lose it, we go like this. Call timeout. Right? We take the time out, and we step back and step away. And then we return and we address those things. Right? We try and come back and just again with our apology, and then try and work through it. Right? And if it becomes sort of chronic, right, or you find it's repeating or it's getting more toxic, that's when, sooner rather than later is the time to reach out for help, right? Reach out and talk to someone, and get connected with a good couples therapist. And again, I would really brag about the Imago principles. And so there's lots of Imago therapists out there who, like myself, I'm certainly available for you, but lots of us out there that do this to help you work through it, because we don't want those things to just start building upon one another, right? We're all going to make the mistakes. And if we use those tools, we get back on track. But if we find we keep veering off and it's getting more toxic, do reach out sooner rather than later. Sadly, too many couples wait till it's too long before they do that. And I'm sure Father Ian has heard a few of them come into his office, and it's very challenging at that point.
Scott, I just wanted to say one thing you had mentioned about the time, how it can be a blessing, and God's plan, you know. It's not our way. We don't know. But I'll tell you one of the things that I hear most often at the point of death, you know, when people are wanting last rites or they're becoming very ill. And one of the overwhelming things I always hear is, I wish I would have spent more time with my family or my spouse. That's always the regret that people are leaving with. And I think, if anything in God's plan with this is, he may question us. What did you do with that extra time? You know, did you grow your family more in the love of Christ? Did you love your spouse more in that time? It wasn't just all a negative time. You know, how did we use that time? So I think that's one gift that, although it's a struggle, I mean, parents are teaching at home, they're praying at home, they're working at home. But there's a gift at that time that I don't think any of us have ever experienced before. It may be forced time, but how did we best become stewards of that time? Yeah, and maybe that's one regret we won't have at the end of our lives. Use that time wisely. Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This was very, very informative, and I know that we appreciate everything you've given us tonight, and this is great. We're going to have you back.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Love to. So appreciate being able to do this. And speaking of gifts during COVID is, you know, Zoom. Right? I was like, wow, I got to all the way out to St. Julie's pretty quickly. It was nice that I could do that. And I'm going to get home pretty quickly too from it. So it's amazing. So again, thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm so glad to stay connected with you as you've moved on from St. Monica.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you all. Let's say a quick prayer and blessing. Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless each and every one of you here, your spouses, your family, and your loved ones. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Father.
you.
Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.